Hello, I'm Dan Curry from the Deeds of God website, and today I want to discuss an American Southwest miracle from the 1800s, from the 1870s, that occurred at Loretto Chapel, which is near Santa Fe. The way it started was that it was the American Southwest in the 1870s, actually 1850s when the story begins, and it was kind of a rough and wild place. You know, there were cowboys, there were Native Americans, there were sheep herders, there were miners, there were people drifting through for their various reasons, you know, but it was kind of a wild and unsettled place, not a very cultured place, and not a very religious place. There was some work that had gone on in California, good work, you know, they had the California missions, but in New Mexico near Santa Fe, there wasn't too much in the way of institutional Christian education. In Kentucky, there was a group of ladies that worked at a convent, and their names were the Sisters of Loretto, and you know, their portion of Kentucky, they did work there, but there were some of them that hoped to move to the Southwest. They got a dream through prayer and thinking about it and discussing it of going to the Southwest and building a school for Native American kids so that they could be trained in normal academic subjects but also trained in Christianity as they were brought up. And they became pretty determined about it, and they wrote letters to the local Catholic authority. They were a Catholic group, and so they decided, let's set out. You know, they obtained their permissions and had assurance of some sort of funding when they got there. So in 1852 they took off, and there were 7 of them, and they started making the trip from Kentucky to New Mexico, and it was a long, hard trip. And you know, 2 of them actually had a lot of trouble on the way. They caught cholera, one of them died from it, and one of them had to go back from it, and the rest of them made it, recuperated enough to finish the trip. And so probably in about 1853 these ladies arrived in New Mexico, and they talked to the local bishop, whose name was Jean-Baptiste Lamy. So they talked about the funding and the location, and they determined what the details would be on that, and it was a green light, it was a go. So they went to the area where they were going to be living and where everything was going to be built, and they hired an architect, and his name was P. Mooley. I should have remembered that. But his name was P. Mooley. That was their architect, and so they began. And with the funds that they had, they could only start off with about 2/3 of their goal in hand. You know, they wanted to get the school up for certain, and they needed a place to live, so they had a convent built near the school. But they also wanted a chapel, but they just didn't have enough funds at the beginning to build their chapel. So the 2 things they did have funds for went up as time went by. They're completed, and they're very nice, and you know, in that area quite distinctive, and people began to enroll in the school. And of course, as the years went by, the community built up around them. A lot of people moved into the area over the next 15 and 20 years, and the school began to be well known and do good work. It was well thought of, and so were the ladies from Loretto. They had you know, that had set up the school and put so much work into it, and things were going quite like they'd hoped, but it took them a long time to save up for the chapel that they really did want. And after about 21 years, they had the funds for that. So they had waited a good long time, and they were able to get a hold of the same architect, P. Mooley, to build the chapel, and the plans they arrived at were for a very nice European style chapel, you know, nice stonework, stained glass windows, very pretty. So they set about the building, and you know, bringing in the materials, the construction crew, all this stuff was arranged as before, and you know, it took some time and some years to go up, and they you know, were impatient and hopeful that it would be done, and it got to be almost done, and it was looking very nice on the outside, well finished. And the inside, they just had a couple more things to finish, you know, like the staircase for the choir loft, and a couple of, you know, other minor-ish items, when suddenly something kind of bad happened. P. Mooley, their architect, had some involvement with some woman, and her husband shot him, or at least he thought there was one, and the husband shot him. So they were out an architect. They had no architect to finish up the project. So there were architects around in the Southwest, California, you know, Texas perhaps. I don't know where they obtained their next architect, but it doesn't mention they had that much trouble getting the next architect. But when he came and looked at the drawings to get himself up to speed as to exactly where they were, he found a problem. He found out that one of those last remaining things, the choir loft, was a room of a certain size, would have stairs leading up to the loft, and the loft would overlook, the place where the mass was was administered, but there was a room in the back where you went up to the loft. Well, that room wasn't the size it said it was on the drawings. It had ended up considerably smaller in real life, and somehow everybody had missed that. So the dimensions drawn into the plans were a lot larger than the dimensions available, and he said, we're not going to be able to build the stairs in this much space. There's just not enough space. It would be too vertical. So they wanted stairs. He said to them, well, you could have a ladder. A ladder would work. It wouldn't be hard to build. Well, yeah, they could do that, but they didn't want to do that because, they wore dresses is the reason given. They didn't think it was a good idea to have to wear dresses and go up and down a ladder. They thought that was immodest. And also, I don't suppose they wanted to be old ladies trying to go up and down a ladder. I mean, they wanted stairs. And so before they had to settle for Plan B, because they brought in several carpenters to talk about this, and they all said, yeah, this space is too small for stairs. So before they were willing to settle for the Plan B, which was, they either go with the ladder or they knock out a wall. And knocking out a wall sets them back who knows how long, more weeks. Well, something is figured out there. They decided to pray a novena. These women were Catholic, and a novena is a 9-day focused prayer where you pray for a specific thing. So if you need a chair or a desk or whatever you need, you just can set a novena and pray your 9 days to Jesus that He'll answer your need for this thing, and that's what they did. So as they were praying their novena for somebody who could answer their problem and come up with a way to build stairs, the days began going by, and 4 days, 5 days led to 7 and 8 days, and finally it was their 9th day, and there was still no answer to their prayers, no solution to their problem. And as the day was winding up, the last part of the last day, they did receive a visitor, a knock on the door. But when they went to answer it, it was just an old-timer who wanted a meal. Had a mule outside and stuff, and just was wishing he could just maybe sit down and have a drink and a meal and a visit with somebody, I guess. And they invited him in, good hospitality, and maybe he noticed they were, a little depressed or something. It doesn't say, but he got to ask them what was going on with them there, and they admitted to him that they had just finished praying a 9-day novena for a solution to this problem of stairs they had, and they explained it to him, and they said, I guess it wasn't in the Lord's plans. And the man said, well, I am a carpenter. Well, he didn't look too impressive to them, but he said he was a carpenter. So he said, yeah, he'd be glad to look at the space. Maybe there was something he could do. So they led him back, and they showed him the situation, and he walked around and, sized it up, and he told them, I can build you stairs for this. Well, they prayed a novena, and it was for somebody who could build them stairs, and here was a man saying he could build them stairs. So they went with that on faith. He said he was a carpenter, and sure enough, they arranged for him to, have living quarters and food, and that was essentially all he asked for. That's all he needed was room and board. So he brought in his sack of tools, which they said consisted of only 3 tools. There was a hammer, a saw, and a square, a T-square. But, I guess that's all you need. And he asked for some tubs to soak water, tubs to fill with water to soak wood in, and they brought those. They had them built or brought or something, but he had a place to soak his wood, and that's really all he asked for. All the joints on the stairs he intended to build used dowels that he could make his own self for connectors or fasteners. Well, time went by, and this man, he was true to his word and kept working on their stairs, and I think that he wasn't wanting too much attention as he was building them, but it does say that when they were all completed, it was a few months later, and he came to him and said, the stairs, they're done. So they walked into the room, to see what he'd accomplished, and he showed it to them, and he said, you have your stairs, And they were looking at a set of stairs that rose the 22 feet up to the choir loft in a spiral pattern instead of the, the more common angular, I don't even know what they're called, angular pattern we see in our houses. And they were a nice spiraling staircase that made 2 complete revolutions, 33 steps. They were beautifully shielded wood on the underside of the stairs. There was sheet wood that curled around with each curl and was, shiny and had beautiful grain, very lovely. The rest of the stairs were very nice too. And they thanked him, and they were excited, and soon enough he left, and he wasn't gone long, and they decided, you know, the one thing about these stairs is it doesn't have a handrail, and they couldn't find the guy. He was gone. They asked around town, he was gone. They hired another carpenter. He came out and he said, "Oh yeah, I could build you, something to hold on to, a handrail that'll spiral up with them." But he says, "You know, these are unusual stairs." He says, "I've seen spiral stairs. You know, they're not the commonest, but I've seen them, and I've read about them, seen pictures." He says, "They have a central support, a pole, and the stairs use that, you know, to support the weight as they spiral around. That's the structural support for a spiral staircase." He says, "As you can see, yours are open in the middle. There is no support. There's no support pole." He says, "I've never seen that, and I've never heard of that." Well, he built them their banister, and you know, they finished the rest of the little details in the church, and they invited everybody for an open house. They couldn't find the man that had done their stairs. He apparently had passed on through, and when they asked about him, nobody really had even mentioned seeing him. So he was just kind of a mystery guy. And everybody came and ate, and they showed him the church and told him they hoped they would attend, all these sorts of things. And people were curious about the stairs because there was already talk, so everybody went back to look at them, and they're very nice. Some of the carpenters were amazed, as the first man was, that he had managed to build a set of stairs that held together and could support weight just fine, seemed strong as any other set of stairs, but no central support. And of that group, none of them had heard of it. Well, as time went by, people began to, you know, talk about those stairs in the strange way that this guy showed up on the 9th day of a novena, and how he'd built a set of stairs nobody could understand. Lots of people started coming to the chapel at Loretto Chapel, as they call it, Loretto Chapel. You know, it became a curiosity, and architects came over the years, carpenters, the curious, many people. It became really the most famous feature of their nice church. And as the years went by, the story grew and grew, and nobody really figured out exactly who that fellow was, who he could have been. And so it became one of those things like, you know, people like to pursue the mystery and find the answer. Well, there was a little bit of investigative reporting done on this, and there was a couple of names that came up of who it must have been, and people thought they had clues and things they found that proved it was this man or another. But the truth is, I don't think it's a fully established matter yet who this man was. And what is true is that he showed up out of the middle of nowhere on the 9th day of a 9-day prayer session where women of faith would count on Jesus to provide them with what they needed. And it's just another testament. A woman of faith, women of faith, praying together, there's just no telling what God's going to provide for them. And again, this is just one of dozens upon dozens upon dozens of great deeds of God that are little known in our time. I'm Dan Curry from the Deeds of God website, and that website has over 100 such accounts from every century going back to Jesus. I hope you can drop by and look sometime. And thank you for listening to this.